These are things that we don't oftentimes think about, but we're using muscles for all of these different things. But guess what? As we age, I mentioned sarcopenia, natural muscle loss through aging. What percentage of our muscle are we at risk of losing every decade? 30 to 40, 40 to 50, and so on.
30 to 40.
No, oh dang, that's way high. But just so under that. Good guess though. Thanks for breaking the ice. Just under 10%. 8%. We're at risk of losing 8% of our muscle mass every decade. So imagine, if you do nothing to support your muscle mass, meaning you're not lifting weights, which is the most important thing we can do to support our muscle mass. I don't care how much protein you're eating, if you're not lifting, I'm gonna tell you, you're wasting your time. And if we're not eating enough protein and enough calories consistently. So from age 30 to 60, if we lose that 8% every decade, that's gonna be 8 times 3, 24% of your muscle mass. So now you can better believe that you're at risk of falling, breaking a hip, and life after that is not very good, right? You're at risk of something like type 2 diabetes because muscle mass helps our body to kind of control our blood sugar levels, among other things, right? Again, getting up from the toilet, playing with the little ones, right? Whether it's your kid or your grandchild or whoever it might be, right? So that's why nutrition is extremely important for supporting muscle mass as well. And that's why we want to make sure we're not cutting out carbs too much, getting adequate protein. And then, of course, fat is important for optimal hormone levels, for the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins, vitamin A, D, E, and K. And even those vitamins, those are micronutrients. They don't contribute calories, but they're still important. Vitamin D, for example. Vitamin D, it's more like a pro-hormone. Like if you have insufficient vitamin D, that can have an impact on your testosterone levels. It could affect your energy levels. It could affect your immune system, right? Even inflammation. Vitamin A, night blindness. These are things that a lot of times we don't take into consideration. But that's why I tell people it's important to get outside. It's important to have a varied diet. So look for color on your plate, right? So now, again, just to kind of summarize, 4 calories for 1 gram of carb and protein, 9 calories for 1 gram of fat. And they're important for different reasons. Carbohydrate, to make sure that we have proper energy. Among other things, I didn't even talk about fiber. And that's important for GI health, for your gut health, which is a buzzword, right? Preventing colorectal cancer later on in life. So carbohydrate, energy, fiber, and being muscle or protein sparing, right? Because without enough carbs, we start using our protein, or our muscles, I should say, for fuel. Obviously, protein is important for the things that I had mentioned, for muscle mass, immune system, enzyme production, transportation of nutrients and recovery, and then fat for hormones and for the fat-soluble vitamins and all those things. And that's what a simple kind of primer on why nutrition is absolutely important, right? So I kind of wanted to go over that, and now back to Mike with the mic.
So we just finished recording a podcast upstairs that we'll release probably in the next week and a half, discussing macronutrients. And now let's talk about the actionable steps on why this is important. Okay, so he just gave us the science and the math behind this, but why is it important? If you're dieting or trying to gain weight, what you're mostly looking for is body composition, right? Or performance, fueling that performance. If you're just looking at calories alone, you don't have control of what your body composition or your performance is going to be if your macronutrients are all off. So when you ask Eric, how does he go through the process of prescribing a client their macronutrients, he's going to tell you he's going to look at their calories, he's going to figure out their total daily energy expenditure, which is part of the BMR. Then he's going to figure out how many calories they need to be at a deficit or a surplus in order to lose or gain weight. And through that, he's going to play with your macronutrients, right? He's always going to try to make sure he starts off with protein, make sure that he's giving you the adequate amount, and it's a range of protein in order for you to keep and build muscle. And then he's going to play with the other two, fats and carbohydrates, in order to put you at a deficit. At all costs, protect muscle by protein consumption and resistance training as possible, at all costs. I've spoken to some of the guys at BJJ, and they follow some sort of fasting protocol, which we could discuss later on. I don't want to get into it right now, but the actionable steps here. So Eric, if you could just kind of summarize the podcast that we just gave upstairs. You get a client, somebody in here, they say, hey, Eric, I'm trying to cut, or I want to lose 10 pounds but protect my muscle mass. Now, what are the actionable steps when they figure out the macronutrients, or when you figure out, or they go online to figure out their macronutrients, to now putting it in play?
So you're saying you want me to go over like the numbers, figuring out of the numbers?
Yeah, so if somebody was to figure out what we talked about upstairs,
okay.
Use me, for example, 215 pounds, I want to stay at that weight. How would you kind of just briefly go over what my macronutrient breakdown would be?
I got you. So first off is finding the BMR. So like we have the InBody that I could use for that, or I can use a calculation to get what his basal metabolic rate is going to be. And of course, it's just an estimate. When it comes to nutrition, nothing is really going to be precise, right? And I'm saying that because we're going to come up with estimates. A lot of it is going to be trial and error. As far as figuring out how many calories he should be consuming, I'm not going to lock him up in what's called a metabolic ward, where all of your gases are being accounted for. So the oxygen that you breathe in, the carbon dioxide that you're breathing out, that's going to tell me what you're using for fuel, carbs, fat. It's also going to tell me how many calories he's burning. That's not practical, right? So we're going to come up with, we're going to use an equation that has been studied throughout the years, and they're all kind of like pretty similar as far as their recommendation for BMR. So we get his basal metabolic rate. Then I got to ask him, well, how much do you move around? What does your day-to-day look like, right? Because if you're very sedentary, there's something that I use called an activity factor. So I'm going to multiply his basal metabolic rate times whatever this activity factor is, depending on his regular movement and his goals. Oh, not his goals, just his movement. So let's say he's very active, moving around a bunch. He does BJJ and he lifts and on a very regular basis. All right, then I got to factor in all these other things. Okay, his activity factor is going to be whatever, just making up a number, 1.6. So now I got to multiply his BMR, which let's just say is 2,000 calories a day, times 1.6, whatever that ends up being. I'm not very quick with that math, but let's just say it's 3,200 calories. Boom. So now I know his total daily energy expenditure that I'm estimating is approximately 3,200 calories. Then, Mike, what's your goal? If his goal is to just maintain where he's at, wonderful. I'm going to make sure he stays somewhere near that 3,200. Most likely, I'll give him a range somewhere between 3,100 and 3,400 for him to kind of stay around there, and then calculate out his macronutrients. For protein, if anybody cares to write this down, I like to give a range, and for protein, it's going to be 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram. For protein. Of body weight, yeah. So in order to get your weight in kilos, you would divide your pounds by 2.2, and that equals kilograms.
Eric, is it safe to say, general rule, you could just do one gram per body weight?
Yeah, for sure. For someone like yourself, yes. So if you're at 215, then his upper goal is going to be 215. Right? Now, you can do more. We actually don't know how much is too much protein. We don't have like a definition of how much is too much. People will say, you know, having protein bad for your kidneys and bad for your bones. There's actually zero evidence showing that. In fact, if you guys care to know this, when people say that having a lot of protein is bad for your kidneys, they base that off of a study that was done in the 70s, I think it was, where they gave a lot of protein to the population in this study, and they saw a decline in their kidney function. But guess what? They had kidney disease. That's like you have a black eye and someone keeps punching that black eye. Why doesn't it get better? Oh, well, now we know, right? So there's zero evidence showing. In fact, a buddy of mine, he ran a study at a Nova Southeastern University where they had their participants consume twice their body weight. So 215 times 2 is what, 430? So 430 grams of protein a day. One, that sounds terrible. Sounds like it's way too much. Like, God, I won't be able to eat that much. That's why if you're going to overeat on anything, overeat on protein. So there were zero negative side effects to the double their body weight in protein from like a biomarker standpoint. If anything, they felt like higher body temperature. They also said it was just too hard to do, but no health parameters were affected negatively.
Eric, if I could cut you off for a second.
Yeah.
This part is important because, like we say, protect muscles at all costs. Most of the clients that we have, and correct me if I'm wrong in this, that we have audited or brought on board, undereat protein, guys and girls. You believe you're eating enough protein, but when you actually crunch the numbers and audit, like a 3-day audit assessment of your diet, we're under-eating protein, most of us, by 10 to 20%, easily. Mm-hmm. It's difficult for me, even with protein shakes, to get 215 grams. It's just so satiating of protein throughout the day. So at all costs, I make sure that Jess and myself, we wake up in the morning, I have 30 grams of protein within 30 minutes of waking up. That just puts me ahead of the game, because if not, I'm going to have to try to catch up at 8 or 9 p.m., and it's just way too much to consume.
For sure. And also something along those lines, if anyone here is interested in something like fat loss, base that number of protein off of whatever your goal weight might be. right? So it's not going to be, if you weigh 215, but you want to be at 195, base it on the 195 number. It also makes it easier to reach that number because, again, hitting 215 grams, as a dietitian, I'm also thinking, and as a coach too, I'm like, what's practical for this individual to do, right? I don't care if this is what studies show. Like if I ask you guys, what's going to be the main determinant in you drinking a protein shake on a regular basis?
Taste.
Boom, taste, right? Unless someone else has an objection. But if it tastes like butt, I'm not going to drink it. That's for damn sure. No, thank you. Right? So does it taste good? Is it practical for you to continue doing? That's what we got to think about. So now that's why I like ranges. 1.6 to 2.2 grams. If you weigh 200 pounds, let's just say, is going to put you at, I think 1.6 is around 145, 150 grams of protein. And then the upper range is going to be 1 gram per pound of body weight, which is 200 grams of protein. But having a range is helpful because we don't eat the exact same food every single day in the exact same amounts. Nor should we, because that could also vary depending on our energy output, on our training. Did we train? Did we train really hard? Did we have a rest day? Right? Did you have a question?
Does it matter like when you eat the protein, like right after the workout and the distribution, like?
That's a good question.
If you eat more than 30 grams, your body can't process it.
Yeah, so the question is, does it matter when you consume your protein? It does.
What amounts, like,
So the amount, I'll tell you, your body's going to absorb however much you consume. There's a belief that we don't absorb more than 20 grams of protein in one sitting. That actually came from a study where they looked at activation of what's called muscle protein.